Hey, it's Amy Newmark. I'm off this week because I'm finishing up our books that are coming out for the Christmas season. So we're going to rerun the third week of the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast from back when we started. And we didn't have as many listeners then, so chances are you haven't heard these episodes yet. So I think you're going to enjoy them.
Changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your daily dose of Chicken Soup for the Soul inspiration. It's Friend Friday, which means that we get to meet one of our fascinating Chicken Soup for the Soul writers who has a very interesting story to tell. And today you're going to meet Carolee Noble, who I had the pleasure of meeting a few months ago in Colorado, where she lives. Now, I'm sounding all upbeat, but I have to tell you why Carolee is on our show today. Carolee's daughter was killed in one of those horrible, ridiculous shooting sprees by some stupid maniac with a gun. And Carolee is going to talk to us about how she found a way to get through this horrendous tragedy. And it's a story that she told in our book, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Think Possible. So, Carolee, why don't you start out by telling us what happened that day and what went through your head when you learned the horrible news?
Well, complete shock to begin with, of course, because for one thing, I had been watching on television this event as it played out with the police looking for this man and eventually shooting him and, you know, all this stuff. And it was in a shopping mall parking lot is where it all happened. And the first thing I thought of when I saw what was going on was my daughter, because, you know, it's just natural to think about your kids, where they might be. But I didn't think she would be at this place, so I didn't think any more about it. It wasn't until about 10:30 that night when I got a call from the police department, and then I just can't describe the feeling that a mother has when you get a call from the police department and they won't tell you anything, just that they want to come and see you. You know, it's just something you just can't explain. And in the 20 minutes between the time they called and the time they got there, I just did, you know, a complete, almost grief process, I would say. It's just, you know, I went through so much in my mind, and I just was already ready for the bad news when they got there.
Well, Carolee, I'm so sorry. And I know you've gotten good at telling the story, but it's still horrible for you to have to tell it. But the reason I wanted to feature you today, despite the fact that this is a hard story to listen to, is because of what you said in your story, that the first thing you thought of was, is it possible that anything good could come from the senseless murder of my child? And you went right to forgiveness, which is just incredible that you knew that that was what was going to get you through it. So can you talk about that?
Yes, I spent that night alone. My son had been there with me, but he had to go home. And I spent that night alone, and I was just basically just laying there looking at the ceiling all night. I was still so shocked. I couldn't cry. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel like even prayer. I mean, I was just so out of it for a while. But then I realized that, just like you say, right from the beginning, that I had to find some way to make something good come out of something so horrible. And I knew I had to start by being forgiving, because I knew the Lord expects that of us. And I didn't, you know, I knew I had to do it for myself, because I didn't want to go through my life being an angry, bitter, unhappy person. I just couldn't visualize going forward that way. And forgiveness of him was the first thing that would have to start that process.
You are an extremely unusual woman, because most people spend years getting to the point that you got to in the very first evening. And then you did something that was equally incredible. And I'm going to quote a little from your story. You saw the sister of the shooter on a television newscast, and she was standing in front of her church, and tears were streaming down her face. as she expressed her sorrow for what her brother had done. And of course, you knew not to blame the sister, and you felt something for her. You felt like this was somebody who you wanted to meet. So then what happened?
Yes, I did. I made a note of where the church was, and I thought, someday, of course, this was just a few days after the shooting, but I knew that I wanted to meet her, but I didn't feel like I was ready for it quite then. But I made a note of the church where she was, and I knew I could get a hold of her through her church. And it was, probably about 3 or 4 months later. I think it was in August of that summer. I called her church. I felt like I was, ready. And I talked to the pastor, and he set up a meeting between us. And I must say, it was just the most remarkable experience. We just basically fell in each other's arms because she was grieving as much as I was. And we just instantly bonded. And we just had a terrific friendship ever since. That helped her with her forgiveness, too. I think about the forgiveness part of it. When I told her I had forgiven her brother for what he did, and she said that really helped her with that, too.
Well, I'm sure she felt somewhat responsible. She had been living with this crazy brother in her family, and she had been afraid of her brother, too. He was a substance abuser. He was an alcoholic. He was mentally ill. And she had said, this is an interesting fact for our listeners. We published a story from Caroline Noble, the woman you're listening to today, in our book, and we published a story by Catherine Cagg, the sister of the shooter, in the same book. So we see both points of view. So in Catherine's story, she says that she was terrified of her brother, and she had actually started sleeping with her feet on her pillow and her head down at the foot of her bed because she was afraid her brother was going to come and shoot her during the night. And she figured this way he would shoot her feet, not her head. But I'm sure she felt horribly guilty that somehow she should have known what her brother was capable of doing, even though in her story she said she had no idea that his self-destruction would extend to a, I guess, suicide by policeman's bullet situation, which involved killing your daughter and other innocent victims at the same time.
That's true.
So you guys ended up becoming public speakers together and talking about forgiveness and healing. And I know you helped a lot of people by doing this public speaking, which you did for quite some time.
I hope it was helpful. I don't believe I would have done it otherwise because I am far from a public speaker. I'm actually rather a shy person. But we made several speeches together in our church. I started going to church with her, as a matter of fact. And that was another way that we, were able to get the word out because we were together so much. And we talked at the church several times. We were interviewed together for a television program. And then I believe a year after the shooting, we were also interviewed as to how, our lives had changed, and what had occurred during that year. And we were on a radio show one time. And then, of course, we've written our stories. So we both thought it was very important to give out the word, how you can recover from a tragedy like that, and how forgiveness is the first step to doing it.
So you say in your story that you have many new friends now. Your old friendships are deeper and stronger than they were before. You say you've become a more loving and caring person, that your family has a tighter bond. And I wanted to ask you, that forgiveness that came to you so immediately for that horrible shooter, have you found that you're now quicker to forgive other people in your life for whatever their minor transgressions are?
Yeah, I do think so. I honestly think I'm just a different person. I think I'm a more understanding, more forgiving person. Certainly do feel closer to my family. You just feel like you never want to leave them. You just want to hug your family and tell them how much you love them because you never know what will happen next.
And how has the rest of your family done with this? Have you been able to help other members of your family find forgiveness to move on as well?
Well, I think so. I don't know that I'm totally responsible for it, but I certainly do my best to always be positive and, try to have a good outlook and try to make sure that I pass that on to my family. I want that to be known as my personality, as a forgiving and positive and happy person.
Well, you sure are a positive person. Now, I'm just wondering, since you are so remarkable, how can other people get to the point that you got to so naturally on the very first night that you learned about your daughter's death? Do you have any tips or strategies that the rest of us can use?
Well, the only thing that I can say is I couldn't have done it without my faith in God. I knew that He would get me through it, and that was my thought. That I just had to have faith that everything would work out for the best, and I would do everything I could, as I assumed that He would want me to do, and that's what it was. Just my faith is the basis of it.
Well, thank you, Carolee. I apologize for bringing up a painful topic again, but I know you're willing to help people with this, and your words will help a lot of other people find forgiveness for things that are probably way less important than what happened to you. All the things that we're all mad at in our daily lives are nothing compared to what you went through. So I want to thank you for joining us and for sharing your message about forgiveness, in your case, for the most heinous crime, and giving us your tips about how you moved forward with your life. I'm Amy Newmark. Thank you all for listening today. And the next time we get together, I'm going to tell you about a woman who was told that she only had 1 year to live. And what she did with that year will make you think about your own life and how you can make it as fulfilling as possible. And if you want to read Carolee's story and the one by her new friend, the sister of the shooter, Catherine Cagg, you can do that in Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Power of Forgiveness, and you can find out more about that book on our website, chickensoup.com.